Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 234 of CryptoBiography. It is part 3 of the Isle of Bronze, and here we go. He asked her attendants to leave with a simple gesture they knew well. "Will you be ready when the emissary comes, love?" he asked her when her attendants had left. He stood just behind her and put his hands on her shoulders, then leaned down to kiss her cheek. "Whether I am or not, I will be there," she replied. She reached up and stroked his cheek. "I understand. I have some people to talk with before it happens," he murmured in her ear. He squeezed her once by way of farewell and left the room, allowing the attendants to return to their queen. His bodyguards once again trailing him, he went to the chambers of Morsili. His general was ready for him, and bowed as an invitation in. The guards stayed outside. Morsili was in his 50s, about the same height as Nasramin, but broader. His beard and hair had mostly gone gray, but he had kept his hair. He had gotten this post by rising through the ranks from his martial prowess and his skill at leading and dealing with people. He waited for Nasramin to talk. "Morsili, you've heard the Thebans are coming?" "I have. It has been 3 moons since last they came. I doubt they want to renegotiate again. What do you think they want? Has anyone come back from Thebes since their visit?" "Unfortunately, none of my spies has done so. I think this is something new, and therefore this is a good thing." Nasramin had a hunch he knew what he meant, but he still asked, "In what way?" "Whatever new news or threat or whatever that they bring, it wasn't at the head of an armada, so even if they mean to attack us, we're getting some kind of warning." "Any chance they're looking for something from us? An alliance, perhaps?" "I would say it's probably the most likely outcome. I haven't heard of any other threats, but perhaps they're planning an invasion or have heard of some threat coming their way. So perhaps they only want an ally, or at least some form of aid. But we've been carefully neutral for centuries." "True, but people have asked before." Nasramin thought back. "Yes, rarely. It had happened during his reign, but only occasionally, and the requests were always made indirectly, so they were able to save face if the answer was negative, as it always was. Bronze is a weapon, and those who make weapons do not have an incentive to sell only to one side, or to give multiple enemies a reason to band together for an invasion. Their neutrality had been yet another reason they had kept from being invaded for so long. Morsili was looking at Nasramin's face. "It is possible one of my spies is returning to us on their ships. If so, I will endeavor to brief him and get the information to you before the meeting with Hermocritus." But Nasramin could tell by his tone he was doubtful this would happen in time, if in fact one of his men was aboard. "Thank you, Morsili." Nasramin rose, and so did Morsili. He bowed to the king, and Nasramin took his leave. He knew whom he would need to meet with next, and mentally steeled himself. Again his guards were walking 3 paces behind him. Linus would be in his chambers. He would be waiting for Nasramin, and he would be as well informed as Morsili. Though, Nasramin mused, he would be unlikely to share any information he had. Would that information include the Thebans' plans for their meeting? It seemed unlikely, but it was not impossible. Linus, like Morsili, had a network of spies, not so widespread as Morsili's, and focused more on the island itself than the world around. But still, he heard things. Regardless of whether he had the information Nasramin craved, he knew that Linus would only share information if there was an angle for him. Linus's own guards saw him coming from down the hall and opened the door for him. His guards took their places as he stepped inside the high priest's quarters. Linus was at his desk. Almost anyone else on the island would be required to rise upon Nasramin's entering the room they were in, but what Linus was not, and did not. Nasramin thought back on his early mistake and wondered if this was yet another small way he was paying for it. It had been less than a year after his crowning, shortly after the death of his father. and he had quietly come to a final understanding that their religion, while devoutly believed by nearly everyone on the island, was really a series of stories having no real basis in fact. His mistake had not been to voice that opinion. He was not a fool, even at 20 years of age, but he had allowed this opinion to color how he dealt with Linus, and the high priest had noticed the slights, however subtle they had been. And being frustrated with the priest in his turn, who had shown his displeasure with less subtle opinions and even some public jabs, he had eventually failed to invite Linus to a summer solstice dinner that he should have, by long tradition, been invited to. Though Nasramin had never made such a mistake again, and had endeavored to hide his opinion of both the priest and his religion, and gotten quite good at it, nonetheless, the priest had never really forgiven this slight. This meeting was, in good part, yet another example of him covering his religious doubts and his dislike of the priest by scrupulous adherence to traditions and norms, and indeed exceeding them where it would not, in his opinion, weaken him. The high priest was to be consulted before important affairs of state. Perhaps a meeting with the emissary of a city-state, especially one that had had such a meeting already so recently, might not qualify, but he was erring on the side of generosity. Linus waved him to the most comfortable chair across from his desk. The high priest, nearing his 70th year, could have passed for a man at least 10 years younger. He was thin and strong, not given to overeating or heavy drink, and with dark eyes under thick brows that left no doubt to their owner's intelligence. His hair was salt and pepper, only at this age finally starting to give way to white. His beard was mostly white, but thick and healthy. His robes were beautifully well made, yet not so overtly extravagant as to make him seem vain. "Have you heard about the Theban delegation coming?" he asked Linus. The priest nodded. "The timing is unusual." "I agree," Nasramin said. He reminded himself that, though the man had clearly decided long ago not to like him, they were not automatically foes in everything. "I have been asking around, but there seems to be little to indicate why they are returning." Linus nodded again. Nasramin reminded himself that the one who speaks less in a conversation like this usually has the power. He decided not to say anything, but wait for the priest to make some kind of move. It was possible the priest had much the same thing in mind, and would be upset at losing the high ground in this match. But on the other hand, he wanted the priest to see him as strong, and so even his anger could have some value. The priest finally broke the silence. "I have heard nothing that can help you." "Then we can only wait and see what transpires." Even this wording was careful. He used "we" to indicate that he saw the priest as being with him on this. "Indeed, sire." "Have the gods given any hint as what is to come?" Nasramin was particularly careful to keep this bit of tradition, and to appear to be interested in the answer. And in a way, he was, for though he didn't believe the gods were even real, he absolutely thought the answer the priest gave could indicate much about that man's thoughts. "We have not been given enough time to do a proper sacrifice to the gods," Linus said, "nor have I been able to tell anything by ornithomancy. Fortune-telling by the flight of birds was an age-old practice, particularly by religious leaders." "A pity," Nasramin said. He did not suggest that they delay the meeting so that further soothsaying could be completed. "But we will know what they say soon enough, and perhaps the gods will have more to say to us then." "Let us hope," Linus said, his face inscrutable. "In the meantime, does the high priest have any advice for his king?" "He does not, though he trusts, as always, that the king will keep the future of the island ever in mind." "He will." Nasramin rose, and with a nod to indicate respect, turned and left Linus. And that's where we're ending the story this week. Obviously, lots more to come. Hope you're enjoying it. I'm certainly enjoying writing it. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2021, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.